to it and have been for a while. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the June 2026 meeting of the California Water Quality Monitoring Council's Microplastics Monitoring Subcommittee. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Shelley Moore, and I serve as co-chair alongside Monica Arinzio and Pavlova Vitali. And just a little bit of a background on me. I am a co-founder for the Moore Institute for Plastic Pollution Research, as well as a former executive director. Now I'm working on special projects for the Moore Institute and happy to be doing so. Just one little side note is that I just recently adopted a new dog. So if I have to run and get her to be quiet, I apologize. I'll put myself on mute right away and we'll do that. So I'm gonna pass it on to, I don't know, is Monica, are you in the meeting? No, I know Monica's been
Oh, I
traveling.
mean, um, yesterday, some point, you should a time schedule order.
All right. So I don't think Monica's here. Monica is one of the co-chairs. She is with the Desert Research Institute, and I'm actually going to pass it on to our newest co-chair, Pavlova Vitali, and have her give a little introduction to herself, and you'll get to hear more about her. Pavlova.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Shelley. I'm Pavlova Vitali, and I'm with the Water Quality Control Board in Los Angeles. Like she said, I'm the new co-chair. I'm excited to be working with the group, and I look forward to learning from all of you and collaborating with everyone. Um, Thank you very much. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Pavlova. And some of you may have noticed that uh, we're missing a third person that we normally have, and that is Scott Coffin. Oh, he is in the meeting. Hi, Scott. And I did want to give him a shout out and say thank you, Scott, for everything that you've done. Um, and your years of leadership and contributions to California's microplastic efforts. Your work has really helped build much of the foundation that allows us to have these conversations today. And I was going to ask if you would let people know where you're at right now. And I'm sure Scott will be participating in these meetings into the future and contributing and doing all kinds of wonderful stuff. He's still in the microplastics realm. Did you want to say a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much, Shelley. And it's really great to see that this group has started again after a couple year hiatus. And I'm really grateful for this community. And yeah, just so excited to see that it's going to continue on. I'm not going anywhere. I'm still with State Service, working in the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment to assess the human health risks of microplastics in drinking water. And so I'll be attending and engaging, just not as a co-chair anymore. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. Appreciate all your hard work. This is our agenda for today. Done the call to order and the welcome. Got a few administrative updates. They're really kind of information on how we've operated in the past and going forward. Giving you some updates on that. Presentations are amazing today. Can't wait to get to them. We'll get to them in just a few minutes, and then we'll finalize it. We'll end the meeting with some subcommittee discussion, where we want to take this group, how, what topics do we want to approach, those kinds of things, and then leave with some final public comments and adjourn after making our next meeting date. All right. So I did want to acknowledge the Water Quality Monitoring Council. It was established in 2007 through Senate Bill 1070. Its mission is basically to improve coordination and cost effectiveness of water quality and ecosystem monitoring, increase integration of monitoring data across agencies, and improve public access to environmental information. Our subcommittee contributes to those goals by advancing microplastics monitoring information, data sharing, and communication across California. The Microplastics Monitoring Committee is one of two groups that are operating under the California Trash Monitoring Work Group. And there's a number of different groups that operate under the Water Quality Monitoring Council. You can see the Trash Monitoring Work Group there on the bottom left. And under that, we have some still active groups, the Data Management Group, and I'll introduce you to that a little bit in the next slide, and the Microplastics Subcommittee. These groups have been the most active over the last few years. We did originally have two other groups, one on the unhoused trash problems, and then the other on citizen monitoring. Those COVID hit, and those two groups fell off and haven't been meeting at all since then. So moving forward, just give you a little background on data standardization, management, and coordination. Tony Hale has been leading that with Wynn Calgar. Tony's from the San Francisco Estuary Institute and has done a lot of work in the in many different areas and is just a wonderful person and really good with data and software and all that great stuff and managing all those wonderful people up at SFEI. Wynn Calgar is with the Moore Institute for Plastic Pollution Research, and he's also been leading the charge with the data standardization group and really has that group really has been meeting more than any other group under the trash monitoring work group subcommittees, and they've been going for quite a while. They do have regular meetings. If you're interested in that, please reach out and I can get you set up to participate in those. Again, the Microplastics Monitoring Subcommittee, and we just introduced you to ourselves. But under that, I wanted to let you know that we've have had subgroups under the microplastics group, and that the first one is the consumer messaging work group. Brent Alspach led that group, and they were looking at messaging around microplastics in drinking water. When people hear about microplastics in drinking water, they might become a little alarmed, and that group worked on some messaging that could go out to help basically lessen the worry about it. I was going to ask Monica. I think she participated in that group. I didn't participate in that group. Scott, I think you did participate in that group. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
Did you want to give a short uh, description of the outcome? Because I know that group isn't meeting anymore. They finished what they wanted to accomplish.
Yeah, the product from this was a white paper that was published from Arcadis through the WRF Water Research Foundation. So they also were able to leverage some funding, external funding for that, and it includes a survey that was done by an additional group. Asking people how they would feel about certain types of messaging in response to health effects of microplastics and finding of microplastics in drinking water, in order to craft messages that ensure that people, one, like, well understand the issue, and also see the impact of certain types of messaging on whether they increase or decrease trust of water systems, what messengers providing that information instill the most trust, which medical doctors were by far and away like the most trustworthy group out of the ones that they tested, as well as dentists. So those were some big takeaways for me from that. It's a very well done project and report. It's fairly long, and I'll try and find it and drop it into the chat.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. Uh, the other group that met initially was the Sampling Analysis Playbook Work Group, and that was led by Shelley Walther from the Los Angeles County Sanitation District and myself. And honestly, this has been kind of dead in the water for a while. We understood and realized that this was a big undertaking to create something like this, and we started looking for some funding sources and haven't been able to find them just yet. But What we want this to be is not just a listing, this playbook, to be not just a listing of monitoring methods. We want it to be the place where everybody goes when they're starting a microplastics project. We'll have information on how to do a sampling design, how to do data collection and data analysis and all of that stuff. And so we realized it was a big undertaking. We still want to do it, but we're looking for funding sources going forward to try to uh, get it moving again. So it's a little bit on the history of what we've been working on. I also wanted to remind everybody the California Trash Monitoring Work Group has a web page, and this presentation, along with the recording from this meeting, the agenda, and other files will go out after the meeting. So if you want to revisit and get information, you can do so. And if you don't have time to write down the URL, you can get it from my presentation that will be posted on shortly after that. And we'll try to send out an email with links and everything as well. So it is 1:15. I want to keep us on schedule. So we are going to go into our presentations. So let me introduce to you our first speaker. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Kelly Moran from the San Francisco Estuary Institute. Dr. Moran has become one of California's leading experts on tire wear particles and their contribution to microplastic pollution. Her work has been instrumental in developing statewide estimates of tire wear particle emissions and understanding how these particles move from transportation corridors into aquatic habitats. Tire wear particles represent one of the largest sources of microplastics entering California's environment, making this work highly relevant to both monitoring programs and management decisions. Today, Dr. Moran will discuss California tire wear microplastics emissions estimates, transport pathways from roadways to receiving waters, and evidence of tire-related chemicals in San Francisco Bay during the rainy season. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kelly Moran.
And thank you. And here we go. So hopefully everybody can see that.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
right. All right, let's get going. Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to share this. I'm humbled by the introduction and really appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you today, especially right before the discussion of the statewide plastics monitoring strategy, because this is a pretty relevant topic. So I'm going to run through a lot of stuff quickly at a pretty high level. I'll start with some fast facts just to orient you a little bit. This is going to be a little deeper dive about why tires weren't on the radar for microplastics researchers. And then on the road, I'll actually talk about the tire wear emissions estimates and then where they go. And then I know this really isn't a chemistry focus group, but I do want to say a little bit about chemistry. So you're going to see a few chemical names in a few places. And then I've got some at the end, some resources to highlight in a web page. And I also want to say I'm really impressed at the number of people who are here and some folks that I haven't seen in a really long time who I have a lot of admiration for. So thank you for taking the time to join this meeting and be part of California's future in microplastics. So California has a lot of tires. It's just hard to get your head around how many tires there are in California. We have more than 36 million registered motor vehicles on our roads, and they travel more than 300 billion with a B miles annually. It's just a tremendous amount of driving. So we generate more than 60 million waste tires every year, which are another challenge because our state is actually responsible for managing all of those tires and where they go. So some of them circle back around. Now, as everyone knows, because anyone who's been around a car will see the tires wear down. So they start out with a thick tread and they wind up with a thin tread, and that's when you have to replace them. And all of that stuff goes somewhere. So where it goes is out into the environment, and we all don't want to think about that, but that's what's happening. So when tires rub against the road, the rubber slowly wears off. and it generates these really funky particles that are made of rubber, the tire additives in the tire, which make up more than half the tire. There's a lot of airspace in there, and there's also bits of road material. So they're kind of a conglomerate of a bunch of things. And here's a couple of scanning electron microscope photos just so you can get a sense for what they look like. Some folks have said they look like little cigars, and the data that we've analyzed on tire particles does not show that at all. We see any shape under the sun and no linearity in the data set. And as we'll talk about in a moment, there's also a lot of very small particles that aren't amenable to these kinds of photos that may have different shapes entirely. So are tire wear particles microplastics? This seems to keep coming up as a question. I honestly don't think this is really a question, but because especially the tire industry wants to argue that rubber isn't a plastic and therefore it shouldn't be part of microplastics monitoring, I guess I'm going to put out the arguments that they're very much important for microplastics monitoring, and it's really just a question of semantics. They're anthropogenic particles, they're persistent, and they're toxic to aquatic organisms. So does the answer to this matter? So scientifically, no. What microplastics monitoring for a long time has been focusing on anthropogenic particles. But regulatorily, this could have implications if people decide that they want to try to redefine tires somehow out of that. California's got a really great definition for microplastics that clearly includes tires. So it's really not a question here. In the news, so a lot of folks have seen stories about tires and salmon kills. And so just want to make sure everyone's heard about this and is up to speed on it. There is an ingredient in tires that keeps the tires from falling apart from air, oxygen, and ozone in the air. And that ingredient, its nickname is 6-PPD, which is a good enough chemical name for today. And 6-PPD reacts with oxygen and ozone in the air, and it forms a bunch of different chemicals, one of which is 6-PPD quinone. And it turns out 6-PPD quinone is one of the most toxic chemicals to aquatic organisms that's ever been identified. It's up there with bifenthrin and a few other things that are super, super toxic. So that chemical, when it runs off, so it gets washed off of roads and outdoor urban surfaces and into streams, and it has been directly linked to the death of coho salmon. So we don't know for sure that that's the reason there aren't coho salmon in big parts of California, like the San Francisco Bay watershed. But it's suspected that that's a big contributor. And up in Washington State, they still have streams that have coho that receive urban runoff. And so they actually see this horrible mortality. It's just a truly awful thing. And some really amazing chemistry went into understanding this. And the state is trying to tackle that along with tire manufacturers and a whole lot of other smart people. And I'm really grateful for that. But this is a long-term slow thing. And honestly, it's just an example. So here we go. All right. So this is a little bit dated as a data set, and Suzanne will look at it and say, Kelly, there's not all these things here that should be here. But I just wanted to highlight that there's a lot of data out there that shows that tire particles and associated chemicals in the leachate are harmful to a huge variety of different aquatic organisms with different endpoints. Many of the studies in this early review showed were included concentrations, so exposures that were environmentally relevant, and the body of evidence has only grown since this review was done. So there's just not a doubt that there's issues beyond 6-PPD quinone. Some of these are caused by zinc, but that the species that are sensitive to zinc are only a subset of the species on this list. So zinc is also in tires. All right, so why were tires not on the radar? So this is where it gets a little technical, and I want you to try to pay attention here because this will, I think, explain why so many people weren't catching tires. So what this is a particle size distribution for tires. And on the, so that this line that goes up and down, that's actually the particle size distribution. So it's the percent of the total stuff that wore off the test tire at each particle size. And this is 100 microns here, it's 10 microns, it's a log scale. The other line, the one that's more like an S curve, is the cumulative volume of particles. So this is volume which is proportional to mass. So what you see is almost all of the particles are less than about 125 microns. And most of the particles are bigger than 10 microns. So what we find is that in older microplastic sampling, including that done by the San Francisco Estuary Institute, folks used a 125 micron filter. So that meant only a little tiny bit of tire wear debris would be caught. And you'd see these little black bits in there and not really think about it too much. When tires are also only caught when you're sampling in a place where they're going to be in the sample. So like in urban runoff, stormwater runoff, you'll see that. And SFEI was one of the first groups to ever do that. That since they're heavier, unlike a lot of plastics, tire particles are heavier, so they're going to sink out by the time you get to, say, a lake or the bay or so forth. So you won't be catching them in samples, water column samples. So now a lot of folks are switching to smaller filters and filtering and sampling in stormwater. So this is a huge change because in a 20 micron filter, you're capturing virtually all of the tire wear debris if you're sampling in a place where they're going to be in the water that you're sampling, so like stormwater runoff. So I'm hearing reports of folks who will have different filter sizes, and the 125 filter won't have much in the way of black stuff in it. And there are places where the 20 micron filter is completely black. And in fact, the tire material obscures the ability to identify and measure the other plastics in the sample. And this is why it's this particle size distribution. Now, there's another set of particles that are really interesting for us that are the really small particles, less than 10 microns. And those are the ones that you can breathe. So PM10 and PM2.5 are what the air folks talk about. So you can see in terms of total volume of tire material, that's not a lot of mass, but it is a lot of particles by number. So now this is another particle size distribution where we're looking at the number of particles instead of the mass of the particles. So the orange line here is the number of particles. You see a peak in number at about 20 microns, and then it goes up here and there's this spike and it falls off. And the dark blue line here is the cumulative number of particles. So you can see number-wise, this graph shows a lot of particles less than 10 microns. So what's really important is that that spike is actually showing you that particles are below the instrument detection limit. So this method didn't even measure the smaller, so the nanoparticles. So the air quality folks use different instruments, and those instruments actually can measure the nanoparticles. So I just want to illustrate for you what's happening in that nanoparticle size range, is that there's even more particles, that the number of particles is going up and actually peaks over here well below a micron. So you can see there's a lot of particles over there by number. And that explains why we're breathing tires and why we see chemicals from tires in human beings. So tire nanoparticles, although they're not a big volume, they're potentially environmentally important due to their surface area and their ability to pass through cell membranes. All right, on the road. So now let's shift over to how much of this stuff is out there. So we estimated tire emissions in California 2 different ways, one of which was based on tire wear and the vehicle travel, and the other one was on total tire sales and how much wears off your tires before you replace them. So real simple, very simple processes, hard to find the data, but it turns out the California Air Resources Board has this really great data sets about vehicle travel, miles traveled. So we switched that to kilometers, and we're always using vehicle kilometers traveled, but really amazing data sets, different types of vehicles, all the locations they're in. This is such a useful resource for microplastics work around tires. Now, wear rate data is a whole nother problem. So there's very little of that that's published. Most of it is not very good. It outcites itself back. Somebody actually wrote a paper about how bad the papers are estimating tire wear rates. But we did find one from a German auto club that measured wear rates for European passenger cars, and we had to do adjustments for larger vehicles. So the second method we use, this is why we did 2, is we got tire sales data, which is pretty good data set from the US tire manufacturers. And then the tire manufacturers working with Department of Toxic Substances Control did some tread mass loss calculations, collected data about different tires, and came up with a variety of numbers. They did their calculations one way, we did them a slightly different way, and had some discussions about that. But in any case, they give us some ability to estimate how much is lost from tires. Happily, these 2 methods converge on relatively similar numbers. So the estimated annual emissions in the state of California is more than 100 million kilograms of tire wear material every year. And that's equivalent to 2.6 to 3 kilograms per person. And that person includes a baby and an old person, everybody in the middle. And that amount of tire wear debris, you got to kind of try to get your head around it. It's the amount of the weight of a newborn baby or a house cat. That is coming off cars every year for each one of us in California. Most of that is not you driving. Most of that is goods and services generated emissions in addition to some folks driving large volumes. So this is a lot of material coming out every single year into California's environment. So no wonder we're finding so much in stormwater runoff. And I can just show you this, that our estimates were in the range of other estimates that have been published. So off the road. So what happens to it? So the first time people really saw a lot of tire particles was when SFEI did a microplastic study that covered a whole lot of different media back in 2019, when the report was published, and then a paper in 2021, and used some modeling on top of their data to estimate that 5 trillion tire particles enter San Francisco Bay annually. This is a lot of tire particles. So how do they get there? So what happens is when you drive down the road, or anybody's driving a vehicle down the road, the stuff wears off of the tires. Some of it's ground into the pavement, not too much. Some of it sticks on the vehicle. A lot of it is released up into the air. And the larger particles wind up getting spewed around by tires. This is why you see kind of dirt next to the road and not just on a road. They get spewed within about 10 meters of the road. So you see actually declining signal away from the road. It also gets blown to the side of the road. And then stuff gets further ground up, and there's other processes. And this is some of how you get these nanoparticles. The very small particles, as I mentioned, do go into our bodies. Now, just as a reminder, I think everybody here probably knows this, but we do have municipal separate storm drain systems in almost all of California, with just a couple of exceptions. And that means that the tire material is going into a storm drain. Most stormwater runoff, not all of it, most of it flows untreated to a local surface water body. Most of the tire research that's out there about particles comes from Europe or other places with combined sewer systems. So there's a lot of information that's misleading about the environmental fate and transport of particles for California's environment. And that's something I really urge you to keep in mind. Modeling work, monitoring work, folks are telling stories that are not relevant to California. So how much does make its way to surface waters? So we can learn some lessons from other pollutants than their transport in the environment. If it's a small particle, it can come, when it comes off, some of it's going to get sequestered, like in the soil. So it moves around the urban environment and eventually lands on soil and just sticks there. Some of it, a little bit, gets collected by street sweepers. Street sweepers are not super great at collecting particles in the size range of tire wear debris. There's some work going on there. I think Jill's on here, from Jill Murray, but there is work going on here to better quantify that. And maybe it's better. I'm hoping it's better than we think it is in terms of being able to collect that tire wear debris. And then some of it's washed to surface water. So we started with, based on a literature review, there's not that many papers out there, but Bob Pitt and his colleagues did a series of stormwater literature reviews, and the 2005 one specifically tackled the question of the wash-off of small particles from roads into surface waters. And based on their review, they say, hey, it's about 9% actually reaches surface water, and the rest of it gets stuck somewhere. So our initial hypothesis is it's something in that range for tires. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but basically the whole concept of wash-off is what's in runoff versus what's emitted. And we use the microplastics and measurements from the San Francisco Bay Area and a whole lot of extrapolation, and wound up estimating the fraction of particles may reach San Francisco Bay, which is interesting to us. But more interesting statewide is that we estimated somewhere in the range of 2 to 6% of tire emissions reach surface water each year. So in other words, most of it lands someplace else in the environment and stays there, but there's still quite a lot of that cat size per person emissions that gets all the way to surface water, because 2 to 6% of a lot is still a lot. So chemicals. When we think about microplastics, we tend to think about the particles and not so much about the chemicals they carry. Sometimes people think about chemicals that stick to the microplastics. Tire microplastics are not unusual in that they contain chemicals that are themselves also potentially harmful to aquatic organisms and people. And something that a lot of folks don't realize is that a tire, the typical tire, is only about half rubber. So the other half is all kinds of different kinds of additives and to do various things, give various properties to the rubber or to help it manufacture it from raw rubber into a tire. So there's all these chemicals that are integrated and move around in the environment with them and get released from them. And that makes it really complex to understand what's going on with tires and their impacts in the environment. So another effort that SFEI has been involved in some years, starting with some work with Ed Kaloje up in Washington, is to measure and understand the presence of tire-related chemicals in the environment. There are a few chemicals that are pretty uniquely associated with tires, and the one I mentioned that kills the salmon, 6-PPD and 6-PPD quinone, are pretty much exclusively from rubber and from tires. So they're a really good marker. HMMM, hexamethoxymethylmelamine, is another one that isn't for sure just tires, but probably mostly tires. So we see these chemicals in all the matrices that we monitor in the bay. So, and importantly, we see them out in the middle of the bay. So the last little bit on chemistry here is that Ezra Miller led a study that has just been published as a report that summarized some monitoring for a few years in the San Francisco Bay for these chemicals. So there was a suite of tire-related chemicals working with Ed Kaloje, and it included monitoring right in little embayments right near the shoreline. So it's near places where the runoff runs off. So you'd expect tire concentrations. And then out in the very middle of the bay. So a boat went out a couple, within 2 weeks of a storm and went up right in the middle of this giant bay and sampled water and then tested for chemicals that might be associated with tires. So these tire chemicals were detected not just in the nearshore pink spots, but also right out in the middle of the bay. So unsurprisingly, we found higher concentration in the wet season when that transport is being accelerated by stormwater runoff. And of course, the nearshore areas where there's more stormwater runoff proportionally had higher concentrations. But the power of this is that a single product can be contributing chemicals that are detectable in a water body of the size of San Francisco Bay. It's kind of hard to get your head around that. So on to resources. I hope that everything I've got here is now up on this webpage. We just did some website updates and cleanups. I wanted to highlight the emissions estimates report. So that's a couple years old and it's up on this website. So that has the details of what I was describing about emissions and wash off. There was a really neat report done for the, and I really want to thank the Ocean Protection Council for funding it in particular, that did various conceptual models to look at how stuff gets from whatever the products it's associated with into urban stormwater runoff. And so this one tells the story and has a figure and really goes into a bunch of detail about how the tire material moves around. Hot off the press, this is the study that I was talking about the chemicals that Dr. Miller led. And then this review paper, which was led by Paul Mayer, who's just recently retired from EPA, and a whole lot of colleagues, is just an incredibly useful resource for all kinds of information about the full life cycle of tires and its environmental implications. And it summarizes conceptual model work, some chemistry work, a whole lot of other things. And I really want to honor the co-authors, at least a couple of which are here in this meeting. So in conclusion, we estimated that tire particle emissions are 2 to 3 kilograms per capita annually. That's a lot. We preliminarily estimated, say, 2 to 6% of tire emissions actually reach surface water via urban stormwater runoff or road runoff. Tire particles do release toxic chemicals like 6-BPD quinone, and that matters in the environment and probably can't be easily untangled from the effects of the particles themselves. And tire contaminants reach detectable concentrations in San Francisco Bay, which is not so great for fish. And just to really make sure that you caught my recommendation that microplastic programs need to include tire particles. And I realize that is not an easy thing and something that's generating a lot of investment in work. And my colleagues are working on these things. So I wanted to highlight 3 colleagues here. Dr. Diana Lin is the head of our microplastics program. She's the lead scientist. She was also the lead in working with the Ocean Protection Council on the state's plastic monitoring strategy. Ezra Miller, Dr. Ezra Miller on the right, is a senior scientist at SFEI, and she's leading the tire chemical monitoring program. And Kaylee Patterson in the middle is actually, I showed the SEMs that she did. She did her master's thesis on tire microplastics, and she does all the work, as Diana says. And I particularly want to highlight them because this is my last external presentation as an SFEI employee. I'm going to be retiring from SFEI in a few weeks. And I really want to thank you for the opportunity to give it and thank SFEI for the opportunity to work on this work. So thank you very much. And maybe I'll stop screen sharing and see what's in the chat and take some questions.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and that was amazing. And congratulations on the retirement. You will be sorely missed, for sure.
Well, I'm not vaporizing. I will still be active in the scientific community. I'm on several science advisory panels, so I'm not going to be disappearing and planning to go to CTEC this fall. So
That makes me happy. Thank you. Thank you so much for all the work you've been doing. Um, I will open it up to questions, but I actually have a question. You've mentioned that 2 to 6% get of the tire wear particles get to the surface waters, and that just seems so low to me. And you mentioned that as well. Do you have any idea where or any gut feeling about where the some of it's ending up, or is this an underestimate? I don't know. It just seems low.
it actually seems, having worked in stormwater for a long time and looked at particle transport from tiny, tiny particles like brake pad wear emissions through big ones, like various kinds of sediments, it's not surprising to me. Stuff gets stuck everywhere. So when it might come off and initially fall on the road, but then things get resuspended, and you can see that stuff everywhere. You can see it in the gutters, you can see it on buildings, it shows up on lawns and dirt on the roadside and so forth. So unless you're in a really super impervious area, like I live in downtown San Francisco, we've got all impervious surfaces here. So here it sticks to buildings and then probably does wash off when it rains. But in most places, there's lots of places for it to get sequestered. It gets stuck in all the cracks and dirt and everywhere else. It can get stuck in storm drains. So a lot of storm drain inlets, they get cleaned by vacuum. You don't see the municipal plays, but they're out there with their Vector trucks cleaning them out. And there's a lot of other places that stuff just gets sequestered in the environment. So to me, this is not a surprising finding. And I realize that is really a surprising thing for people who are doing this, because I'm seeing modeling estimates of 50% wash off, and they don't sync with the stormwater data.
Thank you so much. Richard Watson, do you have a question?
Well, I have a question and a comment. One, I'm sorry to see you retire, Kelly. Kelly and I first met, I think, in the morning of sometime in March of 2011 with DTSC about tires, and in the afternoon with the tire industry. So I don't think they've liked either one of us ever since, because I've been very active in this arena too. In a watershed in which I consult, and we've been working on this stuff for years, one of the things we found is there's a lot of particulate matter cleaned out of the catch basins along the road. And in one of the cities, Lakewood just gave me some data that their consultant that cleans out the catch basins finds about it varies, but they find a high percentage of what they call soil. So that's particulate matter, and that means that you've got a lot of tire wear particles in there. And then they find a certain amount of vegetation, and they find a certain amount of trash, but a very high percentage of what's in those catch basins is particulate matter, and I think that's how you account for a lot of that material that doesn't reach the receiving waters.
Good point, Rich. Thank you. Nice to hear your voice.
Awesome. Dee Barker, you have a question?
Yes, thank you so much, Kelly, for that fantastic report. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, I think you might have mentioned it already because I was listening to your response to a question or sort of elaboration. When there was testing out in the middle of the bay, was it testing mainly surface testing or depth?
We take water samples, so from a boat on the bay, so it's not like all the way down to the bottom of the bay.
Okay, so is
So
it mainly, so it's mainly surface? Like how deep did you go for sampling?
So I don't know the specific answer to that question. This is human beings off a boat, so they're not going super
Mhm.
deep. But Dr. Ezra Miller might still be on and might be able to
Yeah,
answer that question.
yeah,
Is
he's,
he
I
here?
think he said 1 foot under the surface.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
okay,
good job.
that's good to know. I'm sampling water myself, and so but I'm looking at different areas like recreational water and ocean. So I appreciate this little bit of extra detail to help me keep my eyes open for this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I just want to reemphasize, since tire material is denser than water, we don't expect to see the tire particles at meaningful concentrations in large bodies of water like that. So lakes and so forth, we're going to see it in places like stormwater runoff, but the chemicals are coming out and mixing with the bay water. Hey, Bonnie.
Bonnie,
Hello, Kelly. How are you? We have a history of working together on the drinking water side. Kelly was a great assistance to the city of Sacramento and the water users up in that area. And this is the perfect segue for what you're just talking about. So we talk about this 2 to 6% of the wear ending up there. Has there been, I mean, obviously you'll have your scientific thoughts about what is the composition of that 2 to 6%, what kind of things are that are in the tire wear are the constituents that are coming through to the actual receiving waters. Has there been a study on that?
No, and look forward, and something will be coming from SFEI, which is starting to, so Dr. Lynn and Kaylee Patterson are starting to take a look at what the mass is of transported particles. So that's an ongoing research question. There's a lot of folks thinking about that. In terms of just a conceptual model, it's most likely that the smaller particles are going to wash off. So the smaller you are, the faster you move in stormwater. So the more likely stuff is going to be smaller, which then becomes really hard to enumerate. And that's why doing mass-based analyses of total tire material could be really helpful to understand this part of the transport. The chemicals are coming out from the point of the being on the car. Chemicals can get released from the car, from the wear debris, all the way while it's sitting in the storm drain system, all the way through in the creeks and keep coming out. So those chemicals will be eventually transporting separately from the particles. And that's the part where we see that chemicals in the bay, either that's like nanoparticles, so stuff that's so small that it's basically floating, or it's free chemical. And we can't tell the difference with the methods that we use. And I
Thank
bet
you.
Suzanne knows more.
hi Suzanne, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. I don't know about that yet, but I did have a question about the human exposure side and whether there are any early studies in that area in California, since you're, quite far ahead of most other states in the US. I've seen recently a couple of studies out of China that have looked at 6-PPD specifically and are finding things like estrogen receptor activation, endometrial cell proliferation, thyroid hormone, long list. So I'm not sure if anyone's starting to think about those things given the size range and exposure concerns.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything specific in California. Ezra's been, so I should clarify that Dr. Ezra Miller is a toxicologist, so he's really on top of the literature in this area. And we've been discussing it every time a new paper comes out. What does it mean? What is it saying? And so forth. And it's the data are pretty clear that humans are being exposed because of the findings of 6-PPD quinone, things like human urine and the human body. But what that means and what about the other chemicals and what they mean, these are really major outstanding questions. So as far as I know, these chemicals are not included in any California specific monitoring program, but I'm not aware of all the toxicology work that's being done out there. I know the Air Resources Board is asking questions about emissions. So they're actually taking a much more detailed look at tire emissions than they had in the past and are trying to hone in on that because they recognize the pathway for human exposure, but they are not yet tackling the chemicals question associated with that.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right, any other questions?
Well, I just want to say thank you for your time and attention. I really appreciated the questions today, and I'm looking forward to the next presentation.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Your talk was amazing. All right, let's go on to our second speaker. Our second speaker is Dr. Kyla Kelly from the California Ocean Protection Council. Many of you are familiar with the statewide plastic monitoring strategy, which represents one of the most comprehensive efforts underway to coordinate plastic pollution monitoring across California. The strategy provides a framework for answering critical management questions regarding resources, occurrence, transport, exposure, and impacts of plastics as well, while helping agencies coordinate efforts and maximize the value of monitoring investments. Today, Dr. Kelly will provide an overview of the strategy, discuss its current status, and its implementation framework. Welcome, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you. Can I get a confirmation that you can see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm Kyla, the Water Quality Program Manager at OPC. I oversee much of our plastic pollution work, and really grateful today for the opportunity to talk to you about the statewide plastics monitoring strategy and beginning steps towards implementation of it for microplastics. Okay, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the statewide microplastic strategy, but just as a reminder, the strategy was developed in coordination with specific state agencies, and in February 2022, OPC adopted it. The strategy details a two-track approach implementing immediate multi-benefit solutions to prevent and manage microplastic pollution, while simultaneously furthering research and monitoring to fill critical knowledge gaps and identify additional management solutions. I want to highlight that objective 1 of track 2, the Science to Inform Future Action track, is all about monitoring. On this slide, I have 3 actions within this monitoring objective that call for standardized microplastics monitoring methods, a pilot monitoring program, and eventually a statewide ambient monitoring network. And I'm not planning on presenting this today, but I just wanted to mention that OPC developed a report to the legislature on the statewide microplastic strategy, and it includes updates on implementation status and recommendations for addressing and studying the microplastic pollution problem in California. It was required by the same legislation that directed us to write the strategy. I forgot to mention, in addition to the recommendations and implementation status, it also has an update on the state of the science in California. Returning to the 10 recommendations, 4 of them are related to monitoring, and I've summarized them here on the slide. And these recommendations focus on improving monitoring and data collection to fill key knowledge gaps, including identifying and prioritizing major microplastic sources and pathways, strengthening controls on pollution entering waterways, implementing standardized monitoring methods across the state, and establishing a centralized and publicly accessible hub for microplastic data. So I mentioned this because these recommendations are designed to be complementary with existing state priorities surrounding microplastics and potentially align with future investments by the state to effectively monitor and address environmental and public health impacts caused by plastics, potentially supported by the Plastic Pollution Mitigation Fund. Speaking to the microplastic strategy implementation, since its adoption in 2022, OPC has made a few key investments to implement those objectives. First, we funded SWIRP to support microplastic sample collection method evaluation and standardization. We also funded SFEI to develop a statewide plastics monitoring strategy and planning framework, which I'll call the Plastics Monitoring Strategy, or framework for short. And third, just last week, our council approved funding for a pilot statewide plastics monitoring program that will focus on microplastics and implement the plastics monitoring strategy. So in my talk today, I'll briefly go over the monitoring strategy and tell you about OPC's first steps towards implementing it for microplastics. Okay, so let's first talk about the need for statewide monitoring and the plastics monitoring strategy and framework. As many of you are aware, California has several policies to reduce and prevent the flow of trash and plastic debris into California waters, and other efforts to prevent the proliferation of plastic waste. And some monitoring occurs at the regional level, but we lack a consistent plastics monitoring program across the state. So the purpose of a coordinated statewide plastics monitoring is to establish a baseline understanding of plastic contamination in statewide aquatic environments and eventually identify trends in how that contamination may be changing over time. Investigate the impacts of this contamination to both humans and ecosystems. Track the state's progress in reducing and managing plastic pollution, including evaluating the efficacy of management actions. Examine the community benefits of successful management actions, and finally use this data to inform future efforts that are targeted towards certain areas of the issue. So this monitoring strategy and framework provides information, recommendations, and considerations to help inform the development of a consistent, coordinated plastics monitoring program and network to help California further address the plastic pollution program. I should also mention that just give a shout out to Diana Lynn and Tony Hale, who were in charge of leading this effort, in addition to other folks at SFEI. So just huge thank you to them for developing this excellent document. But a brief overview of the strategy document, how it's organized and what it contains. First of all, background information is provided throughout the document, including state of the science, what kinds of monitoring have been done in California and where, methodologies and their limitations, as well as existing plastic-related legislative mandates or other state programs that are relevant, such as the trash amendments. In terms of the document's organization, it's broken into two main sections, microplastics and macroplastics. These, while we acknowledge that they are inexplicably linked, we kept them separate in the strategy due to their different methodologies, the maturity of the underlying science, regulations, and information needs for informing policy and management. Within each of these sections, there is a strategy and a planning framework. And the strategy outlines management questions and monitoring questions, as well as recommendations and points to consider when designing and implementing a monitoring program, such as location or geographic considerations. The planning framework section describes recommendations for phased implementation of a statewide monitoring program. It has suggestions for what might be done in a pilot program, next steps after that for building out the monitoring program using lessons learned from the pilot, and finally, long-term recommendations for answering the strategy's management questions. There's also a data management principles section that at a high level describes current challenges we face with managing microplastics data and recommendations for addressing those challenges. And lastly, I want to mention Appendix C, which describes existing monitoring efforts in California or entities with monitoring capabilities or interests that can be leveraged or partnered with to implement the strategy, as the goal is to really build more statewide coordination. This appendix is by no means exhaustive, and we, of course, welcome others who are not listed in there as we move forward. So in developing the plastics monitoring strategy, SFEI convened a state advisory group with state agency representatives, a technical advisory committee of plastic scientists, and the public to develop management questions. And you can think of management questions as ones that policymakers and other water quality managers or scientists and the public might ask about plastic pollution to inform management actions. So the microplastics and macroplastics monitoring strategies are grounded in these management questions to ensure that collection of data is useful to state agencies. Going over them briefly, question one is about the levels of plastics in aquatic ecosystems and how that might impact ecosystem and human health, especially considering the disproportionate impacts that may be occurring. Question two is about sources, pathways, and loadings. And question three is about how these levels might be changing over time and how that might be related or not to efficacy of management actions. I want to highlight a few of the monitoring strategy recommendations, especially with regard to microplastics, as that will inform the pilot microplastics monitoring that OPC will support. So the plastics monitoring strategy recommends monitoring sites with a gradient of land use types from urban to agriculture to less or unimpacted sites. It recommends prioritizing monitoring water bodies most likely to be worst case scenarios, such as those impacted by urban runoff or areas that have sensitive habitats. Leveraging existing monitoring programs is ideal for efficiency. And finally, filling data gaps both geographically and matrix-wise. The map on the right, created by SFEI, shows that LA and San Francisco have been more studied than other coastal and inland regions for sediment and water matrices. And the strategy specifically notes that freshwater and sediment data are currently lacking, and more studies are needed to help identify areas with high rates of contamination and loading. The planning framework in the microplastics portion of the monitoring strategy suggests using the State Water Board's Stream Pollution Trends Monitoring Program, or SPOT, within the Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program, or SWAMP. The SPOT monitoring program conducts statewide monitoring to identify long-term trends in stream sediment contaminant concentrations and relates those to land use characteristics and management decisions, which provides an existing statewide framework that could be leveraged to integrate microplastic sampling across this gradient of different land use types from urban, agricultural, and undeveloped watersheds. These sampling sites are located at the base of large watersheds, so it provides an integrated representation of up-watershed processes. And this could be an effective platform to implement the strategy's recommendations, particularly by monitoring, as I said, across different land use types and addressing existing data gaps in freshwater and sediment environments. Additional locations or priority environmental matrices may be addressed through special studies with the pilot we're planning, or by leveraging additional monitoring programs, but that remains to be determined. So last week, our council approved the disbursement of funds for a project to develop and implement a plastics monitoring strategy. This will involve establishing a technical advisory committee to inform sampling design based on the microplastics monitoring strategy and framework, conducting government-to-government tribal consultation to ensure pilot sampling design and future monitoring efforts reflect tribal priorities, design a microplastics monitoring study that leverages existing efforts, likely SPOT, as I mentioned, establishing appropriate data management protocols in the infrastructure, and implementing field sample collection through pilot monitoring program. I will note that the state water boards and OPC are currently discussing next steps. We have not yet identified any grantees to carry out the field sample or collection or other pieces, but we're currently working on that now. Following the plastic monitoring strategy's recommended incremental approach to developing a statewide monitoring program, results and lessons learned from this pilot will inform future program expansion. And the Plastic Pollution Mitigation Fund, which was established by the Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Producer Responsibility Act, or SB 54, may also contribute to future statewide monitoring efforts to support identification of priority locations for investment to mitigate plastic pollution and track the efficacy of statewide efforts to address and reduce plastic pollution. I wanted to touch on potential engagement opportunities, as I know that's something that this group is interested in hearing more about. A goal of future statewide monitoring is to enhance coordination statewide, collecting data in a consistent manner, making it accessible in appropriate data management infrastructure. And so engagement with local and scientific communities is definitely very important. But the pilot and future monitoring program will be informed by community needs, and the outreach the state is currently doing through the Plastic Pollution Mitigation Fund efforts will lay the foundation there, and we expect there to be ongoing opportunities as we ramp up statewide monitoring. The monitoring strategy and framework that was recently completed also underwent public comment, and the state will use this public comment as one source of information to inform future monitoring efforts. And we also know it's important to have scientific community input. So both the pilot and future state water monitoring will include that. And I'm happy to share updates on those as opportunities arise and the project continues. With that, yeah, I'd like to thank you all for your time and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kyla, for a great presentation. It really hit all the information I was looking to get, and I think the strategy is going to be a big driving force going forward. So thank you so much. Bonnie Starr, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you so much. Kyla, I'm just curious, on the drinking water side, we have a Senate bill that we have to comply with that required microplastics monitoring at a large number of drinking water treatment facilities, surface water plants. And the Division of Drinking Water underneath the state board developed a definition. They developed an analytical method. They're putting together a policy. They're a little stuck. We were supposed to start monitoring in 25, but there seems to be some problem with like the collection process. Are you guys coordinating with them at all? Because that's going to be a really large amount of data.
Yeah, I've been interacting with Helene, who I believe I've seen on this
Yes.
call,
Yeah.
and the water boards on some of that. And these efforts are absolutely synergistic. This statewide monitoring strategy like focuses on aquatic ecosystems water and like environmental water, but there's absolutely like overlap with drinking water, and we're looking for synergies where we can in this work with the drinking water program.
Yeah, last time I talked to Helene, it was like 28, maybe. It seems like it just keeps getting pushed out further. So, all right, thank you.
Any other questions? I have a question, Kyla. I guess all the stuff you talked about, how can the microplastics subcommittee help you to reach the goals of the strategy, and do you see a role that we can play in it?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I said, we're going to be looking for developing a scientific and technical advisory committee. So it's likely we're, still under development on who that might be and what that might look like. But I think, tapping into this committee's expertise will be valuable and for disseminating information and gathering information. So would love to keep in touch with you all as our efforts move forward and we need scientific support.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions for Kyla? All right. Well, thank you to both Dr. Moran and Dr. Kelly for two excellent presentations. I think today's presentations complement each other very well. The first focused on specific and increasingly important source of microplastics, tire wear particles, and while the second is focused on California's broader strategy for monitoring and managing plastic pollution. So two excellent presentations looking at two different things, but very much so related. Thank you both again for your excellent presentations. I want to spend some time going forward talking about um, basically identifying some different roles that we can take in hitting the goals that we have. And I'm going to share my slide presentation again. So let me pull that back up and kind of direct the conversation with that. Do you all see my presentation?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So, just as a reminder, one of the well, here's how kind of the things that we want to discuss with you guys as far as this subcommittee specifically, how we can better interact to work on monitoring and policy, and the implications those might have, coordination across agencies and programs. We've got a lot of people on this call. We've got the opportunity for much collaboration, and we also will get an update from hopefully from Lori on the May 28th Monitoring Council discussion, and the Coast and Ocean report data challenges. The Microplastic Monitoring Committee Subcommittee supports California's efforts to better understand and address microplastic pollution by fostering collaboration among agencies, researchers, and monitoring programs. The subcommittee works to promote consistent and scientifically sound monitoring methods, improve the collection and sharing of microplastics data, communicate findings to decision makers, and compile information on monitoring activities throughout the state. Through these efforts, the subcommittee helps advance the broader mission of California Water Quality Monitoring Council by improving coordination, increasing access to environmental information, and supporting informed management and policy decisions. So we have some goals set for this group, and what I'm hoping is that we can, as a group, come up with ways to accomplish those goals. I kind of look at the microplastics subcommittee as in two lights. One is we are here to inform everybody who is interested in microplastics on current science and policy and that kind of stuff. And that's why we have our invited speakers for these meetings. But we also want to do other things as well. And as I mentioned before, we had those subcommittees or the subgroups on our microplastics subcommittee, and both of those groups were meeting on a regular basis. Again, Scott Coffin explained the outcome from the consumer messaging work group. It was a document, published document that basically gets that message out there about drinking water and microplastics, and helps to keep the public informed and feel better about participating and hearing about what's going on in the drinking water realm. The same thing with the sampling and analysis playbook. We're looking to get the messages out there and get the information out so people can use it and basically work together so that we're basically comparing apples with apples instead of apples to oranges. So one of the things that I would like to do is have a discussion around, are there any other subgroups that you guys would potentially be interested in? We heard about tire wear particles. Perhaps that would be a good topic for a subcommittee. The monitoring playbook, the plastic monitoring strategy. Is there anything else that you guys think is really at the top of the list for getting more information and developing strategies around, or we want to help everybody. Richard, do you have a question?
Yeah, excuse my wearing this t-shirt. I was doing personal training before this meeting started. Uh, I'm involved with water quality on a watershed basis in LA County. We got a watershed that's been working together since 2008. One of the things we're now going to be looking at is how to keep sediment out of the open channels that we have in our watershed. And it seems to me that tire wear particles will be a significant part of that. I see two major sources. One, we have maintenance roads adjacent to these flood control channels that are mostly unpaved. And the other is highway sediment and tire wear and copper from brake pads, et cetera. So I see a possibility of trying to work with this group. If you have a develop a subcommittee that's working on microplastics, because I think there's a great relationship between what we're trying to do with sediment and what we're trying to do with microplastics.
That's great. I would love to see a tire wear particle group um, form, and would you be willing to serve as a leader, or I'm certain as a participant for sure, but we're looking for leaders for those groups as well. I don't hear you. Dee, did you want to go ahead and ask a question?
I would be
Yes.
pleased to be on it. I don't know about, I'm not sure I know enough about microplastics to chair it, but I could co-chair it, because it seems to me a lot of you are really focused on the microplastics, and I'm looking at them as part of a larger pollution area and part of the idea of sediment and how to keep that whole business under control, because Kelly talked about the constituents in tires. We got all constituents from all kinds of stuff that we have to deal with on water quality. And so I see a strong connection, and I'd love to be on it and co-chair it, but I think we need somebody who knows more about microplastics than I do.
Great. Okay. Dee, did you want to go? Thank you, Richard.
Sure, thank you, Shelley. One of the things that the cross-pollination between the two talks so far and answering your question, is that I'm already trying to assess the interface and interactions of the movement of the microplastics between the atmosphere and water bodies in our area. And this kind of falls into both the tire wear particles, what emission versus what's in the surface water that I think Kelly brought up. And then it's also cross-pollinates with the plastic monitoring strategy that's looking at the water itself and where things are going and how to monitor it. So I'm interested in basically what I could probably create a synopsis as the movement of microplastics in the water cycle, which includes both the atmosphere and in the water systems. And I think this is relevant, and I think that our first presentation demonstrates that relevance.
That's a great idea. And for those of you who don't know, Dee is from Alaska Pacific University. She is creating a lab up in that area, and is looking to become another accredited lab, and doing some really good work up there with looking at the microplastics in water and in different parts of the environment and ecosystem. So thank you for that suggestion, Dee. Pavlova.
Yes, hi Shelley. I was wondering about whether we can have a topic along the lines of artificial turf. Artificial turf is becoming widely popular, especially down here. And so we were wondering, we're switching one issue with another potential bigger problem. And I know for a fact one school district in Southern California opted to replace all of their grass for all the schools under their jurisdiction with artificial turf, and that there's apparently a big concern from the parents and the people that live in that area, with this decision. Unfortunately, there are no regulations, just concerns. So just curious how we could help, advance the science so that maybe we could, influence policy.
Well, I think that's a great suggestion. It's one of the things that I definitely have strong feelings about, and I think having a group that addresses that and maybe does what the drinking water messaging group did, would be an amazing thing if we can maybe potentially produce a document to share with the public about why they shouldn't use artificial turf. I think that's a wonderful idea. So I've got that down on my list, and once we get input from everybody, I'll let you know what we're gonna do before the next meeting. Andy.
Oh, hello. Well, some great talks and great points that have been brought up. I wanted to chime in and support what Dee mentioned and also what Richard mentioned, bringing in the atmospheric component of transport, considering coupled atmospheric and waterborne transport, I think is super important at this point, and would be very relevant to a committee like this. Particularly because there just haven't been that many studies that have pulled both of those transport pathways together, and they're clearly very important, especially as we get to the smaller size fractions that are of greater concern for human health. And then also from the standpoint of thinking about these particles as sediment, that's the reason my group got into this, and a lot of the other kind of more physically oriented Earth service processes scientists who are involved in microplastics research. And clearly, there's been a ton of work done on the sediment side to inform monitoring for decades and decades, and that's really what should be and is currently starting to inform the monitoring of microplastics in aquatic systems. So I wanted to just chime in and support both of those ideas. And I also wanted to bring up this thought of maybe more explicitly folding in multi-phase and reactive transport, right? Since, there's a lot of discussion, of course, of leachates, and of course, it's very complicated to try to parse out even the role that these particles play as they're moving through these watersheds and sediment transport cascades in terms of the release of these leachates. And for tire and roadwear particles, I think it's a pretty big open question still, what role the particles themselves are playing as they move through watersheds versus how much of those materials are being released right at the road surface. So it gets a little further afield from microplastics themselves, but the multi-phase and reactive transport is also going to be really important and continue to complicate things from a monitoring and modeling perspective.
Great suggestion. Thank you, Andy. It's good to see you too. All right. Anybody else? All right. So you guys have given a lot of suggestions. I think they're great suggestions. What the co-chairs are going to do for the microplastics subcommittee now is to go off and we're going to get some more information. We'll probably reach out to those who have made comments and get some more information from you as well, and report out on this for the next meeting. If you have, in the meantime, if you have other suggestions or you want to lead up a group or anything like that, feel free to reach out to the co-chairs and let us know. Lori, did you want to report out on the data challenges? I don't know if you.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Shelley. Yeah, and so hi everybody. I'm Lori Weber. I'm the executive director of the Monitoring Council, the Water Quality Monitoring Council, which is sort of as Shelley mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, it's the umbrella organization that sponsors the trash monitoring work group and the microplastics subcommittee. So the Monitoring Council last met on May 28th. And we heard a variety of different presentations, updates from the work groups, and I'll share the link in the chat. Hopefully you'll be able to copy and paste it, but there's a lot of good updates and information shared. One of the updates that has some relevance to the microplastics subcommittee, so I wanted to come to this group and sort of share this with you. So at the meeting, we heard an update from the Ocean Protection Council and the Ocean Science Trust on a new report that they released called the California Coast and Ocean Report. And it's this overall assessment of the health of California's coastal and ocean ecosystems. And they sort of compiled data from many different sources and used a variety of different indicators to evaluate coastal and ecosystem health. At the end of the presentation, one of the main reasons they came to the council was to talk about some of the data challenges, and they identified different data types where they had gaps or that it was difficult for them to use the data. And microplastics was sort of at the top of the list as a data gap. And I believe they weren't able to use any microplastics data, sort of along the coast for their analysis. So during the council discussion, and I need to acknowledge that Krista Kamer, who is a monitoring council member from the academic sector, at least I saw her earlier at the meeting. So she's a council member. May not have been part of this discussion, but just acknowledge that she's here. But during the council discussion, the council members charged the work groups, which the microplastic subcommittee is a subcommittee of a work group, to sort of start thinking and brainstorming on how they can meet some of these challenges that the Coast and Ocean Report staff had difficulty data-related challenges. And also to mention another important topic that was sort of talked about that Kyla talked a little bit about was that OPC and Ocean Protection Council and Ocean science trusts are working to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge into their assessments. And so I just think that's something that this work group should have on their radar. We recently hosted a webinar, Indigenous Microplastics Monitoring, and I can also share the link. Really interesting work going on in that space. So I just sort of wanted to bring this up with this group. And, it's another direction to consider other, sort of the direction of the work group now that you're reinvigorating, which is great. And just, encourage you to think about this. Perhaps at the next meeting, invite somebody from some of the staff that worked on the Coast and Ocean report to the next meeting to talk about how to fill some of the microplastics data gaps. So anything?
That sounds
Happy
great.
to answer any questions.
So essentially, they're looking at help with data and getting it out to the public and making sure it's shareable.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Well, we have a data subgroup, a subcommittee under the trash monitoring work group. Let me chat with them and see and invite them to the next microplastics subcommittee meeting. And if we can get somebody else from Coast and Ocean Report, we can have a good conversation about that. That sounds great.
Yeah, and let me know if you need my help sort of reaching out to people or, making connections.
And by the way,
Happy to
the
help.
Indigenous microplastics presentation was great. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the chat. I apologize to people who are having difficulty clicking on the links. It's a setting in the Zoom account that we have that you have to copy the link before and paste it into a browser. It won't let you click on it directly, unfortunately.
We can also send the link out too.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Lori, for mentioning the Indigenous perspective. Part of my endeavor involves our Indigenous communities in Alaska. And I just want to mention that that's an important feature because Alaska, as you already know, is a very large area of land, and a lot of our people live in the very rural areas out there, and yet they're also impacted by microplastics and are concerned about it. So I appreciate your input on this topic. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thanks for your input as well.
Thanks, Dee. All right, so we've got a charge. Our action items as the subcommittee co-chairs are to address some of these suggestions and also come up with some presentations for our next meeting. I want to put out there that the next meeting for this committee will be subcommittee will be on September 23rd. It's a Wednesday from 1 to 3. And we'll send that out. At least that's the date that I have selected. I'll clear it with the co-chairs and then we'll send it out. I want to put a date down just so that we have something to look forward to next. And let me ask, are there any other topics that you guys would wish to hear about? We had amazing talks today. We're not afraid to ask people to come talk to us. Is there any particular topic that anybody's interested in that we can find a speaker for? Heather.
Well, I'm a total interloper. I'm Heather Trim with Zero Waste Washington up in Seattle. I only could come in for part of your meeting today, but I love what you guys are doing. We want to model it for our state, of course, and learn from you guys. Have you done anything on paint microplastics?
Yeah.
It'd
Good
be
subject.
cool if you guys could lead the nation on that.
Okay. Well, I will look for somebody who's working on that right now and see if we can get them to come talk to us at our next meeting. Anything else that you guys are interested in? Well, if something comes up, feel free to email me. That was it. That is all I have for you guys today. So we'll get done a little bit early today. And we will be sending some emails out, or an email out with information for you guys. Again, the next meeting is tentatively for September 23rd from 1 to 3. And thank you for your participation. Thank you to our speakers, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We've got a few in mind. We've got a few in mind.